I was 3 beers deep into my Saturday afternoon when I heard the sharp knock on my door that would change everything. Standing on my porch was Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA in Mesa, Arizona, clutching a manila folder like it contained nuclear launch codes and wearing the kind of pursed lip expression that made my stomach drop. "Mr. Bennington," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in, "we need to discuss your recent home improvement." I set my beer down on the entryway table and crossed my arms. "My what? Your roof." She flipped open the folder with practiced efficiency, revealing printed photos of my house taken from various angles. "You installed new shingles without submitting the proper architectural review forms, and more importantly, the color is not within our approved palette." I blinked at her, genuinely confused for a moment. "Patricia, those shingles are Dakota Ridge Gray. They're literally on the approved list. I checked before I ordered them." "Dakota Ridge Gray has a greenish undertone," she insisted, jabbing a manicured finger at one of the photos. "These shingles are too warm. They're clearly autumn timber or something similar." The thing about Patricia Hendricks was that she had been making my life difficult since I moved into Sunset Ridge 3 years ago. My grass was too long by half an inch. My Halloween decorations stayed up 2 days past November 1st. My truck, a perfectly clean Ford F-250 with my company logo, was apparently too commercial looking for residential parking. Never mind that half the neighborhood had work vehicles. Mine offended her sensibilities. What Patricia didn't know, however, was that I had spent the last 15 years building one of the most successful roofing companies in the greater Phoenix area. Grayson Bennington Roofing wasn't just some fly-by-night operation. We had contracts with major developers, commercial properties, and yes, plenty of HOAs throughout Maricopa County, including Sunset Ridge. "Patricia," I said slowly, keeping my voice level, "those are the exact shingles from the approved list. I have the receipt. I have the product specifications." "Then you'll need to provide those to the board for review," she said primly. "In the meantime, you're in violation of Section 14, Paragraph C of our CC and Artiques. You'll be fined $500 and an additional $200 per week until the matter is resolved." My jaw tightened. "You're fining me $700 because you think my roof is the wrong shade of gray. I'm enforcing community standards, Mr. Bennington, something you seem to struggle with." She pulled out a violation notice already filled out and signed. "You have 14 days to appeal this decision to the board. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my walkway, leaving me standing in my doorway with a violation notice and a burning anger that made me forget all about my afternoon beer. I went back inside and pulled up my records. The roof had been installed 2 months ago, right after a particularly bad monsoon season had damaged several of my original shingles. I had done the work myself on a weekend, with help from 2 of my crew guys. The shingles were definitely Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42, manufactured by Atlas Roofing Corporation. I had the invoice, the manufacturer specs, even photos from the installation day. But as I sat there scrolling through my files, something else caught my eye. A work order from 18 months ago. Sunset Ridge HOA Community Center, Clubhouse, and 3 model homes. My company had done that job. I had personally overseen most of it because it was a significant contract, nearly $200,000 in total, and the shingles we had installed. Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42, the exact same ones on my roof. A smile crept across my face. Oh, this was going to be fun. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7. I marked it on my calendar and spent the next few days preparing. I pulled every document related to my roof installation, printed them out, organized them in a folder that would make Patricia's look like amateur hour. Then, I pulled all the documents from the Sunset Ridge community building job. Work orders, invoices, photos, manufacturer specifications, installation dates, everything. On Thursday evening, I walked into the community center conference room at 6:55. The room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, and rows of chairs for residents. About a dozen people were already seated, most of them looking bored or irritated. HOA meetings were never anyone's idea of a good time. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members I vaguely recognized. Roger, an older guy who always wore polo shirts. Linda, a woman in her 60s who seemed perpetually confused. Marcus, a younger guy who actually seemed reasonable on the rare occasions I'd spoken to him. And Deborah, Patricia's right-hand woman who nodded along with everything Patricia said like a dashboard bobblehead. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7. "We have several items on tonight's agenda. Old business regarding the pool resurfacing, new business about holiday decoration guidelines, and 3 violation appeals." We slogged through 45 minutes of the most mind-numbing discussion about pool tile colors before finally reaching the appeals portion of the meeting. "First appeal," Patricia announced, looking at her notes. "Mr. Grayson Bennington, 4782 East Saguaro Drive, regarding unauthorized roof replacement and color violation." I stood up and walked to the front, setting my folder on the table. "Good evening, board members. Thank you for hearing my appeal." Patricia's expression was already smug. She thought she had me cornered. "I'm appealing the violation notice I received last Saturday for 2 reasons," I continued. "First, the roof replacement wasn't unauthorized. Section 14, Paragraph C requires architectural review for installations that alter the external appearance of a property. My roof replacement maintained the exact same profile, style, and color as the original roof. No external appearance was altered." "The color was altered," Patricia interrupted. "That's the entire point. Let me finish, please." I opened my folder and pulled out the first set of documents. "Second, and more importantly, the shingles I installed are Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42, manufactured by Atlas Roofing Corporation. This color appears on page 7 of our architectural guidelines as an approved roofing color." I slid copies of the manufacturer specifications across the table. "These documents show the product code, color name, and specifications. These photos show the shingles on my roof. And this is my purchase receipt from Southwest Building Supply." Patricia barely glanced at the documents. "Mr. Bennington, I've looked at your roof personally. Those shingles are not the correct color. They're too warm-toned." "Have you looked at them in different lighting?" I asked. "Because Dakota Ridge Gray has subtle color variations depending on the angle and time of day." "That's literally in the manufacturer description." "I know what I saw," she said firmly. "Okay." I pulled out my second set of documents. "Then let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the community center roof?" Patricia blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "The community center, the clubhouse, and the 3 model homes on Cedar Ridge Circle. Do you know what color shingles are on those buildings?" "They're gray," Roger said, speaking up for the first time. "Nice looking too." "They're Dakota Ridge Gray," I said. "Product code DRG42. The exact same shingles on my roof. My company installed those roofs 18 months ago." The room went quiet. Patricia's face had gone pale. "Here's the work order from that installation." I placed the documents on the table. Here are the invoices showing the purchase of Dakota Ridge gray shingles. Here are photos from the installation. And here's the final inspection report, which was approved by this very board. Marcus reached for the documents, his eyebrows raised. He flipped through them, comparing them to the specifications I had provided for my own roof. These are identical. Yes, they are, I confirmed. My company, Grayson Bennington Roofing, did the community center installation. I personally oversaw that project. I ordered the same shingles for my house because I knew they were approved and I knew they looked good. Because I had literally already installed them on HOA property. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Deborah had stopped nodding. So when Mrs. Hendricks came to my house and told me my shingles were the wrong color, I continued, keeping my voice calm but firm. She was essentially saying that the community center roof, which this board approved, is also the wrong color, which seems like an odd position to take. Now wait just a minute, Patricia said, her face flushing red. The lighting is different, the angle is different, your roof looks different from the community center. Because of the lighting and angle, like I just said. I pulled out my phone and opened a photo album. I took these photos this afternoon. This is my roof at 3 in the afternoon. This is the community center roof at 3 in the afternoon. This is my roof at 6 in the evening. This is the community center at 6 in the evening. Notice how they both have the same warm undertones in the evening light. Notice how they're both slightly cooler in the afternoon. I handed my phone to Marcus, who studied the photos carefully before passing it to Linda. She looked at them, then at Patricia, then at the documents spread across the table. I think Mr. Bennington has made his case, Marcus said quietly. These are clearly the same shingles we approved for the community center. I disagree, Patricia said quickly. I maintain that his roof is not in compliance. On what basis? I asked. I've provided product specifications, purchase receipts, installation photos, and direct comparison to HOA-approved installations of the exact same product. What evidence do you have that my roof is non-compliant? Visual inspection, Patricia said stiffly. Your visual inspection is contradicted by documented evidence and by the fact that you approved the same product on community buildings. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Unless you're prepared to argue that your own visual inspection is more reliable than manufacturer specifications and professional installation records. Roger cleared his throat. Patricia, I think we need to vote on this. The man's made his case. I call for a vote to overturn the violation, Marcus said. Seconded, Linda added, still looking confused but clearly swayed by the mountain of evidence. Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. This is highly irregular. It's completely regular, Marcus said. It's the appeals process. We vote. The vote was 3-2. Marcus, Linda, and Roger voted to overturn the violation. Patricia and Deborah voted to uphold it. I was cleared. The violation is overturned, Marcus announced. Mr. Bennington, you won't be fined and your roof is in compliance. Thank you, I said, gathering my documents, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Before I sit down, I added, I'd like to point out that I was threatened with $700 in fines over a violation that was clearly baseless and could have been resolved with a simple phone call or proper investigation. I'd like to request that the board review its violation procedures to ensure that other residents aren't subjected to the same treatment. Patricia glared at me with pure venom in her eyes, but she said nothing. I returned to my seat, feeling the satisfaction of victory wash over me. Several residents nodded at me as I sat down, a couple even giving me quiet thumbs up. The meeting continued, but I barely paid attention. I had made my point. Patricia had been proven wrong in front of the entire board in a room full of residents. It should have been the end of it. But I knew Patricia Hendricks. This was just the beginning. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I received another violation notice. This time, my truck was parked too close to the street. It was allegedly obstructing the sidewalk, even though there was a clear 4-foot gap between my truck and the sidewalk edge. I measured it myself. I sent a detailed email to the board with photos and measurements. The violation was quietly dropped, but not before I was warned that the board was watching my property closely. A week after that, my garbage cans were supposedly left out past the acceptable time. They had to be stored out of sight by 7 in the morning after collection. I had security camera footage showing me putting them away at 6:45. I sent that to the board too. Then it was my landscaping. A palm frond had fallen in my yard and wasn't removed within 24 hours. Never mind that I had been out of town for a business trip and the frond had fallen the day I left. Never mind that it was removed within an hour of my return. Patricia was waging a war of attrition, and it was starting to wear on me. Every few days, another nitpicky violation notice would appear in my mailbox. My front door needed repainting. My house numbers were faded. My mailbox post was slightly tilted. I documented everything. I responded to everything, and I started noticing something interesting. My property wasn't the only one with minor issues. Roger's house had faded numbers too. Linda's mailbox post had a visible crack. Marcus had a broken sprinkler head that sprayed water onto the sidewalk. Deborah's palm tree had multiple dead fronds, but I was the only one getting violation notices. I compiled all of this into a detailed report and requested another meeting with the board. This time, I wasn't asking for an appeal. I was filing a formal complaint of selective enforcement and harassment. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in early November. The weather had finally started to cool down, and Mesa was entering its perfect season. I arrived at the community center with my report, my documentation, and a calm determination to put an end to Patricia's vendetta. The room was more crowded this time. Word had gotten around about the ongoing dispute between Patricia and me, and people were curious. I recognized several of my neighbors, including Tom from across the street and Janet from 2 doors down. Item 7 on tonight's agenda, Patricia said when we finally reached my complaint. Her voice was icy. Formal complaint filed by Mr. Bennington regarding alleged selective enforcement. It's not alleged, I said, standing up. It's documented. I walked to the front and distributed copies of my report to each board member. 23 pages of detailed comparisons showing violations on other properties that went unnoticed, while similar or minor issues on my property resulted in formal notices. In the past 2 months, I've received 9 violation notices, I said. During that same period, I've documented 47 comparable violations on other properties within Sunset Ridge. None of those properties received notices. I flipped to a page showing photos of house numbers. My house numbers were cited for fading. Here are 6 other properties with equally or more faded numbers. No violations issued. Another page. My mailbox post was cited for being tilted. Here are 4 properties with damaged or tilted mailbox posts. No violations issued. I went through each example methodically, calmly, letting the evidence speak for itself. The board members studied the report in silence. Even Patricia couldn't immediately dismiss the sheer volume of documented evidence. This is clearly selective enforcement, I concluded. And the pattern began immediately after I successfully appealed the roof violation. I'm asking the board to acknowledge this pattern and to take corrective action. These are completely different situations, Patricia said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. How so? I asked. These are judgment calls. Different board members may notice different violations. I'm the only person who's been cited for any violations in the past 2 months, I said. According to this report, you personally signed off on every single notice sent to me. You didn't notice any of the 47 violations on other properties. Patricia's jaw clenched. I enforce the rules as I see fit. That's the problem, Marcus interjected. You're supposed to enforce the rules fairly, not as you see fit. I agree, Roger added. Grayson, this is a thorough report. Patricia, this looks like harassment. It's my job to maintain community standards, Patricia snapped. If Mr. Bennington has multiple violations, that's his fault, not mine. But other properties have violations too, Linda said, pointing at the report. Why aren't they getting notices? Because I haven't gotten to them yet. In 2 months. Marcus looked incredulous. You've sent 9 notices to one property but haven't gotten to 47 violations spread across the community. The room buzzed with conversation. Residents were flipping through the copies of the report I had brought for public distribution. I could see people nodding, whispering to each other, taking photos of the pages. I call for a vote, Marcus said. I move that we acknowledge selective enforcement has occurred and issue a formal apology to Mr. Bennington. Seconded, Roger said immediately. This is ridiculous, Patricia protested. You can't just overturn my authority. We're not overturning your authority, Marcus said. We're acknowledging that it was misused. There's a difference. The vote was 4-1. Only Patricia voted against the motion. I received a formal apology from the board, and Patricia was instructed to cease enforcement actions against my property unless they were accompanied by community-wide enforcement of the same standards. I should have felt victorious. But as I left the meeting that night, I saw Patricia standing by her car, her face twisted in an expression of pure rage. She was on her phone, speaking in a low, urgent voice to someone. I had a sinking feeling this still wasn't over. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with my crew, hosting a dinner at my house for the guys who didn't have family in the area. We ate too much, watched football, and I managed to forget about HOA drama for a few days. But the Monday after Thanksgiving, things escalated in a way I never expected. I arrived at my office that morning to find 2 messages waiting for me. The first was from Southwest Building Supply, one of my primary suppliers. They wanted to discuss my account. The second was from the Arizona Registrar of Contractors, asking me to call regarding a complaint filed against my license. My stomach dropped. I called the ROC first. Mr. Bennington, the woman on the phone said, we've received a complaint alleging that work performed by your company on the Sunset Ridge community buildings was substandard and that you violated contractor licensing regulations. What? I sat down hard in my chair. Who filed this complaint? I can't disclose that information at this stage, but we're required to investigate all complaints. We'll need to schedule an inspection of the work in question and review your company records. I spent the next hour on the phone with the ROC, providing information and scheduling the inspection. Then I called Southwest Building Supply. Grayson, hey, Mike, my rep there, said when he picked up. Listen, I got a weird call last week. Someone claiming to be from Sunset Ridge, HOA, saying there were issues with materials we supplied for their community buildings. They were asking about your accounts, your payment history, whether we'd had any problems. What did you tell them? Nothing, man. It's not their business. But I thought you should know. Whoever it was seemed pretty determined to dig up dirt on you. After I hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen. Someone was trying to sabotage my business, and I had a pretty good idea who. I called my attorney, David Morrison, and explained the situation. David had handled my business contracts for years and was familiar with the HOA disputes. Grayson, if someone is filing false complaints with the ROC and interfering with your business relationships, that's serious, he said. That could be defamation, interference with business relations, maybe even harassment depending on how far it's gone. Can we prove it was Patricia? I asked. We'd need evidence, but the ROC complaint might be a start. They have to document who filed it, even if they can't release it to you immediately. We could subpoena those records if necessary. I want to handle this carefully, I said. I don't want to escalate unnecessarily, but I'm not going to let her destroy my business. Document everything, David advised. Keep records of all contacts, all complaints, all business impacts. If this continues, we'll have a strong case for legal action. The ROC inspection happened 2 weeks later. An inspector came out to the Sunset Ridge community buildings and spent 3 hours going over every detail of the roofing work. I met him there with all my original documentation, photos, and records. "Mr. Bennington," he said when he finished, "I don't know who filed this complaint, but they wasted everyone's time. This is excellent work. Everything is to code, properly installed quality materials. I'm going to note that in my report." "Can you tell me anything about who filed the complaint?" I asked. He hesitated. "I really shouldn't, but off the record. It came through an HOA board member, that's all I can say." It was enough. I met with David the next day and showed him everything. The timeline of events, the documentation of harassment, the evidence of the false ROC complaint, the attempts to interfere with my supplier relationships. "You have a case," David said. "A strong one. We could send a cease and desist letter to start." "Do it," I said. "And send a copy to the entire HOA board. I want them to know what Patricia's been doing." The letter went out 3 days before Christmas. It was detailed and unambiguous, listing every instance of harassment, selective enforcement, and business interference. It demanded that all such actions cease immediately and warned of potential legal action, including claims for defamation, harassment, and tortious interference with business relations. 2 days later, I got a call from Marcus. "Grayson, we need to talk," he said. "Can you meet me for coffee?" We met at a Starbucks near the community. Marcus looked tired and frustrated. "I had no idea how bad this had gotten," he said once we sat down. "Patricia never told the rest of the board about the ROC complaint or the calls to your suppliers. We only found out when your attorney's letter arrived." "She's been waging a personal vendetta against me for months," I said. "I know, and it's completely unacceptable." Marcus rubbed his face. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm calling for an emergency board meeting to discuss Patricia's position as president. This has gone way beyond acceptable behavior. She's exposed the HOA to legal liability, and she's abused her position." "I appreciate that," I said. "I can't promise anything," Marcus continued, "but I wanted you to know that not everyone on the board supports what she's been doing. Most of us had no idea it was this bad." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for January 4th. I wasn't invited to attend since it was an internal board matter, but Marcus promised to keep me informed. In the meantime, I had a business to run and the holidays to get through. Christmas was quiet. I spent it with my mom, who had retired to Scottsdale a few years back. She knew about the HOA troubles and was characteristically blunt about it. "That woman sounds like a nightmare," she said over Christmas dinner. "You should move." "I like my house, Mom." "I'm not letting her drive me out." "Stubborn, just like your father," she said, but she was smiling. The new year came in calm and cold, at least by Arizona standards. I spent New Year's Day doing maintenance work on my truck and trying not to think about what was coming. On January 4th, my phone rang at 8:30 in the evening. It was Marcus. "It's done," he said. "Patricia resigned as president, effective immediately." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "What happened?" We presented her with everything. The harassment, the false ROC complaint, the interference with your business. We told her that the board could no longer support her leadership and that if she didn't resign, we'd vote to remove her. She resigned. Who's taking over? I am, temporarily. We'll hold elections in March per our bylaws. But in the meantime, I want you to know that things are going to change. No more selective enforcement. No more harassment. We're going to run this HOA the way it's supposed to be run. I appreciate that, Marcus. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. We've still got to clean up the mess she made, but we'll get there. I thought that would be the end of it. Patricia was gone, Marcus was in charge, and life could return to normal. I should have known better. In late January, I got a call from Tom, my neighbor across the street. "Grayson, you might want to check your truck." I went outside and found all 4 of my tires slashed. Clean cuts, deliberate. My security camera had been spray painted over, blocking the view. I called the police and filed a report. The officer who responded was sympathetic but realistic. "Without camera footage or witnesses, there's not much we can do," he said. "Could be random vandalism, could be targeted. You have any enemies?" "Maybe one," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, things got worse. My mailbox was knocked over. My front windows were egged. Someone poured motor oil on my driveway, leaving a stain that took me hours to clean. I installed new security cameras, more of them, covering every angle of my property. I also hired a private investigator, a guy named Carlos Ramirez who specialized in this kind of thing. "If someone's targeting you this consistently, they'll slip up," Carlos said. "We'll catch them." He was right. On February 10th, my cameras caught a figure approaching my house at 2 in the morning. They were dressed in dark clothing, face covered, but they moved with a distinctive gait. They scattered garbage across my front yard and spray-painted "trashy neighbor" on my garage door. Carlos enhanced the footage, zoomed in on details I couldn't see. The figure's build, their walk, their height. Then he cross-referenced it with footage from other cameras in the neighborhood that he'd managed to access. 3 days later, he called me with news. "I've got your vandal," he said. "And you're not going to believe this." He came to my house and showed me the evidence. The figure from my camera footage matched someone caught on another camera 3 streets over, walking away from my neighborhood at 2:15 in the morning. In that footage, the person's face was partially visible. It wasn't Patricia, it was Deborah, Patricia's right-hand woman on the board. "Are you sure?" I asked, staring at the screen. "Positive," Carlos said. "Same build, same gait, same clothing, and look at this." He pulled up another image. That's a very distinctive bracelet on her left wrist. Silver with turquoise stones. Your vandal has the same bracelet. I felt a mix of vindication and anger wash over me. She's been doing Patricia's dirty work. Looks like it. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I called David first, then the police. With Carlos's evidence, the police were able to get a warrant. They arrested Deborah at her home on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was charged with criminal damage, harassment, and trespassing. At her arraignment, she tried to claim innocence, but Carlos's evidence was damning. Faced with the prospect of a trial and potential jail time, she took a plea deal. Probation, restitution for all the damage she'd caused, and a protective order keeping her away from my property. But the best part came during her police interview. which I was able to access through David once charges were filed. Deborah admitted that Patricia had encouraged her actions, had complained constantly about me, had talked about wanting to drive me out of the neighborhood. Patricia hadn't directly ordered the vandalism, but she'd created the environment and motivation for it. And while that wasn't enough for criminal charges against Patricia, it was more than enough for civil action. David filed suit against Patricia in March for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit property damage. We also filed suit against the HOA for failing to properly supervise its board members and for the damages caused by their actions. The case didn't go to trial. In May, Patricia's attorney reached out about settlement discussions. Patricia's homeowner's insurance was willing to pay out to make the problem go away, and the HOA's insurance company was eager to settle before the damages got any worse. I received a settlement of $50,000, which more than covered my attorney fees, the property damage, the cost of the private investigator, and compensation for the months of stress and harassment. Patricia also signed an agreement to have no contact with me and to never hold a position in any HOA again. The HOA settlement included a complete overhaul of their enforcement policies, mandatory training for all board members, and the establishment of an independent review process for violations. Marcus, true to his word, had been transforming the HOA culture. The March elections brought in new board members who were focused on community building rather than rule enforcement. Violations were handled reasonably, with warnings and communication before fines. The atmosphere in Sunset Ridge changed noticeably. I ran into Patricia once more in late June at a grocery store in Mesa. She was in the produce section, and I saw her freeze when she noticed me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across a display of avocados. Then she turned and walked away quickly, her cart squeaking as she hurried toward another aisle. I finished my shopping, bought my avocados, and went home to my house with its perfectly code-compliant Dakota Ridge gray roof. Life in Sunset Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. The HOA meetings became actually productive instead of contentious. My business continued to thrive. I even got a contract to do roofing work on 2 other HOA communities in Mesa, both of which had heard about the Sunset Ridge situation and specifically wanted to work with someone who understood proper architectural standards. In August, I was working on a particularly complex commercial job in Temp when I got a call from Janet, my neighbor. "Grayson, you've got to see this." "See what?" "Patricia's house. There's a for sale sign up." I drove back to Sunset Ridge that evening and took a different route home, one that passed Patricia's house on Ocotillo Drive. Sure enough, a realtor's sign stood prominently in the front yard. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. Mostly, I just felt tired. The whole situation had been exhausting and unnecessary. If Patricia had just checked her facts before issuing that first violation, if she'd been willing to admit she was wrong, if she'd enforced rules fairly instead of targeting me, none of this would have happened. But she hadn't, and here we were. She was leaving the neighborhood she'd tried so hard to control, and I was staying in the house I'd fought to keep. Tom came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer, and we sat on my back patio watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. "Hell of a year," he said, handing me a bottle. "Hell of a year," I agreed. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't back down." Patricia needed someone to stand up to her. She'd been making people miserable for years. "I just wanted to replace my roof," I said, and we both laughed. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the sky darken. The temperature was starting to drop from its afternoon high, settling into the pleasant warmth of a desert evening. "You hear they're thinking about doing a neighborhood block party?" Tom asked. "Marcus's idea. He thinks it might help build community, get people actually talking to each other instead of just complaining about rule violations." "That sounds nice, actually," I said. "It's in September. You should come. Bring some of that brisket you made for the 4th. I can do that." The block party happened on a Saturday in mid-September, when the weather was finally starting to break and Phoenix was remembering what temperatures below 90 felt like. The HOA closed off Cedar Ridge Circle, and residents set up tables and grills along the street. I brought my smoker and made brisket, pulled pork, and ribs. Tom brought his famous potato salad. Janet made desserts. Roger, the older board member, set up a margarita station that proved extremely popular. Kids ran around playing in the street, something you rarely saw in Arizona suburbs. Adults actually talked to each other, learned each other's names, discovered common interests. Marcus gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming and talking about his vision for a more connected, supportive community. I found myself talking to people I'd barely known despite living near them for years. Sarah, 3 houses down, was a high school teacher. Mike and Jennifer, around the corner, had just had their first baby. Old Mr. Peterson at the end of the block had been a pilot in Vietnam and had incredible stories. As the sun set and string lights came on along the street, I looked around at the gathering and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in Sunset Ridge. I felt at home. Marcus found me later in the evening holding a margarita and looking pleased. "This turned out better than I hoped." "It did," I agreed. "Good idea." "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Why didn't you just move? It would have been easier than fighting Patricia for months." I thought about that for a moment, watching the neighbors gathered under the lights. I liked my house. I liked this neighborhood, or what I thought it could be. And I didn't think it was right that she could just drive people out because she didn't like them. Someone had to push back. "Well, I'm glad you did. And I'm sorry the board didn't step in sooner. We should have seen what was happening." "You stepped in when it mattered," I said. "That's what counts." Patricia's house sold in October to a young couple with twins. I helped them move in, loaning them my truck for a furniture pickup. They were nice people, excited about their first house, totally unaware of the drama that had preceded their arrival. I didn't tell them. There was no point. That chapter was closed. In November, almost exactly a year after I'd filed my complaint about selective enforcement, I got an unexpected call. It was from a reporter at the Arizona Republic, the state's largest newspaper. "Mr. Bennington, I'm working on a story about HOA governance issues in Arizona. Your case with Sunset Ridge HOA came up in my research. Would you be willing to talk about your experience?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to put the whole thing behind me and never think about it again. But another part of me remembered how isolated I'd felt during the worst of it, how it had seemed like Patricia's power was unchecked and absolute. "Yeah," I said. "I'll talk to you." The article came out in early December. It was a long-form piece examining HOA overreach in Arizona, featuring several stories of residents who'd faced similar issues. My situation with Patricia and the roof shingles was prominently featured, along with the escalation to vandalism and the eventual legal resolution. The reporter had done her homework, interviewing Marcus, reviewing court documents, even getting a comment from Patricia's attorney claiming that the situation had been exaggerated and misunderstood. But the facts spoke for themselves. The article included photos of my roof and the community center roof, side by side, showing they were clearly the same color. It detailed the pattern of violations, the false ROC complaint, and Deborah's criminal charges. The article went viral, at least by local news standards. It was shared thousands of times on social media, picked up by HOA reform advocacy groups, and sparked discussions in communities across the state. I got calls from reporters, from other homeowners dealing with HOA issues, from attorneys specializing in HOA law. My business even got a bump from the publicity. Apparently, the roofer who stood up to his HOA was good branding, but more importantly, the article started conversations. Several Arizona legislators talked about introducing HOA reform bills. Community organizations began offering resources for residents facing HOA disputes. People started paying attention to HOA governance and holding their boards accountable. In January, just over a year after Patricia's resignation, I was invited to speak at an HOA reform meeting in Phoenix. About 200 people showed up, most of them homeowners with their own horror stories. I told my story, focusing on the importance of documentation, knowing your rights, and not being afraid to push back against unjust enforcement. I talked about the value of good board members like Marcus, who genuinely cared about community over control. After my talk, people lined up to share their own experiences. A woman whose HOA tried to fine her for painting her house an approved color because they decided they didn't like it anymore. A man whose HOA banned solar panels despite state laws protecting them. A family whose HOA foreclosed on their house over a few $100s in disputed fines. The stories were infuriating and heartbreaking. But there was also hope in that room. People were organizing, fighting back, winning their battles. The tide was slowly turning. I drove home that night thinking about how strange it was that a simple roof replacement had led me here. If Patricia had never knocked on my door that Saturday afternoon, if she just checked the approved colors list, if she'd been willing to admit a mistake, none of this would have happened. But it had happened. And while it had been exhausting and stressful and sometimes scary, it had also been necessary. It had exposed serious problems with HOA governance and started important conversations about accountability and fairness. I pulled into my driveway, looking up at my roof in the porch light. Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42, exactly as it should be. Spring came to Arizona with its usual burst of wildflowers and pleasant temperatures. The block parties had become a regular thing, happening every other month. The Sunset Ridge community had transformed from a collection of houses enforcing arbitrary rules into an actual neighborhood where people knew and cared about each other. In March, I ran into Marcus at Home Depot. He was loading pavers into his cart for a backyard project. "Hey, Grayson. Got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "I wanted to let you know I'm not running for another term as president. My work has been crazy and I don't have the time to give it proper attention." "That's fair. You've done a great job turning things around." "Thanks. But here's the thing. We need good people on the board. People who understand that HOAs should serve the community, not control it. People who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right." He paused. "You should run." I stared at him. "You want me on the HOA board after everything that happened?" "Especially after everything that happened. You know the rules, you know the right way to enforce them, and you've proven you won't abuse the position. Plus, the community respects you. You'd be perfect." I thought about it as I drove home, pavers loaded in my own truck for a project at my mom's house. Did I want to be on the HOA board? Did I want that responsibility and time commitment? But then I thought about Patricia and people like her, about the damage they could do when left unchecked. I thought about all the people at that reform meeting with their stories of HOA abuse. I thought about the young couple in Patricia's old house, just starting out, who deserved a fair and reasonable HOA. I called Marcus that evening. "I'll run." The election happened in April. I ran unopposed for one of the open board positions and won easily. The new board included me, Marcus as a regular member now, Linda, Roger, and 2 new faces. Patricia and Deborah were long gone. Our first meeting set the tone for how things would be different. We reviewed the enforcement procedures, simplified the architectural review process, and committed to community-wide enforcement of any rule before individual violations were issued. We also established a mediation process for disputes, so conflicts could be resolved through conversation rather than fines and legal threats. It wasn't glamorous work. It was reading documents, answering emails, mediating neighbor disputes about tree branches and barking dogs. But it was important work, and I found myself actually enjoying it. In June, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone I didn't know. The subject line read, "Thank you." The message was from a homeowner in Scottsdale who had read the Arizona Republic article about my situation. She had been facing similar harassment from her HOA and had been considering selling her house and moving rather than fight. But my story had inspired her to stand up for herself. She documented the harassment, hired an attorney, and successfully challenged her HOA's selective enforcement. The board had backed down and she'd kept her home. "I know you probably get a lot of messages," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know that sharing your story made a real difference for me and my family. Thank you." I sat at my desk, reading that message over and over. All the stress, all the anger, all the exhausting months of fighting, they'd been worth it if they'd helped even one person. I wrote back, congratulating her and offering advice if she ever needed it. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. On the wall was a framed photo from the first neighborhood block party, showing the street full of people and lights and life. Next to it was a piece of the original roof shingle from my house, mounted on a plaque as a reminder of where this all started. Dakota Ridge Gray, the shingle that launched a revolution, at least in my little corner of Mesa. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Beer and sunset tonight." "Definitely," I replied. That evening we sat on my back patio again, the desert sky doing its evening show. Tom's dog, a lab mix named Buddy, lounged at our feet. "You think Patricia ever thinks about all this?" Tom asked. "About how different things could have been?" "Probably not," I said. "People like that rarely see themselves as the problem." "She probably still thinks she was right, and I was just a difficult homeowner." "Her loss," Tom said, raising his beer, "to difficult homeowners who actually give a damn." We clinked bottles and drank, watching the sun sink below the horizon and paint the sky in shades of fire. Summer arrived with its punishing heat, driving everyone indoors during the day. But evenings were still pleasant, and the community pool, newly resurfaced with sensible tile that the board had actually voted on, became a gathering spot. I spent a Saturday in July doing a free roofing inspection clinic at the community center, helping neighbors identify potential issues before they became expensive problems. About 30 people showed up, and I spent the day climbing ladders and explaining the difference between normal wear and damage that needed addressing. "You didn't have to do this," Linda said as I packed up my equipment at the end of the day. "Sure I did," I said. "Community service, right? Besides, it's good business. People remember when you help them." In August, the HOA received a request for architectural review. A homeowner wanted to replace their roof. The proposed shingles, Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42. At the board meeting, I pulled up the specifications and smiled. "These are on the approved list. They're the same shingles on the community center and on my house. I move to approve." The vote was unanimous. No drama, no accusations, no 3-hour ordeal. Just a simple approval process working exactly as it should. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside. "You know what's crazy? This is boring now." "What is?" "The HOA, the meetings, the enforcement. It's all just boring administrative stuff, and that's exactly how it should be." He was right. We transformed the Sunset Ridge HOA from a source of conflict and stress into a boring administrative organization that handled community maintenance and enforced reasonable rules fairly. It was perfect. Fall arrived, bringing the cooler weather that made Arizona living worthwhile. The neighborhood planned a Halloween party, complete with a decorated street and coordinated trick-or-treating. I went as a roof shingle, wearing a costume my mom had helped me make. The irony was not lost on anyone. In November, 2 years after that fateful Saturday when Patricia had knocked on my door, I sat in my living room looking through old files. All the violation notices, all the documentation, all the evidence I'd collected during those stressful months. I thought about throwing them away. The fight was over, the problems resolved, the wounds healed. But something made me keep them. Not as a reminder of the conflict, but as a testament to the importance of standing up for yourself. Those documents represented more than just a personal dispute. They represented a principle, that rules should be fair, enforcement should be consistent, and power should never go unchecked. I filed them away carefully, along with a copy of the Arizona Republic article and the thank you message from the woman in Scottsdale. Then I closed the drawer and went outside to work on my yard. Tom and Jennifer, the couple with the baby, were taking a walk down the street. "Hey Grayson," Jennifer called. "We're having people over for Thanksgiving. You should come." "I'd like that," I said. As they continued their walk, I stood in my driveway and looked up at my house. My perfectly normal house with its properly installed, absolutely code-compliant, Dakota Ridge gray roof. The house I'd fought to keep, in the neighborhood I'd helped transform. The Arizona sun was warm on my face, and somewhere down the street, I could hear kids playing. Life in Sunset Ridge was good. Boring, even. Exactly as it should be. I grabbed my ladder and started cleaning the gutters, a routine maintenance task that no HOA could possibly object to. And if they did, well, I had the documentation to prove it was necessary. Old habits died hard, but as I worked, I couldn't help but smile. Patricia had wanted to drive me out over roof shingles, never realizing I was the same roofer who'd installed her precious community center. She'd escalated and harassed and eventually broken the law, all because she couldn't admit she was wrong. And where was she now? Gone, moved away, probably terrorizing some other neighborhood. While I was here on my ladder, cleaning my gutters, serving on the board of an HOA that actually functioned properly, the irony was beautiful. Tom came out of his house and yelled across the street, "Need a hand?" "Nah, I got it," I called back, "but I wouldn't say no to a beer when I'm done." Deal. I finished the gutters, climbed down, and put my ladder away. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the street. In a few hours, I'd be at Tom's place, sharing a beer and probably telling the story one more time about the HOA president who complained about roof shingles without realizing who she was talking to. It never got old. Life had a way of working itself out, I thought as I headed inside to clean up. You just had to stand your ground, document everything, and trust that the truth would eventually win. It might take months of stress and thousands in legal fees, but in the end, justice had a way of prevailing. And sometimes, just sometimes, that justice came with a side of poetic irony that made the whole struggle worth it. I looked up at my roof one more time before going inside. Dakota Ridge Gray, product code DRG42, gleaming in the evening light. The same shingles that had started everything, the same shingles that would probably outlast the memory of this entire drama. My roof, my house, my neighborhood, my terms, and absolutely, unquestionably, 100% code compliant. I smiled, went inside and cracked open a beer. Life was good in Sunset Ridge, Arizona. Finally, blessedly, boringly good.